مرحبا وأهلا وسهلا فيكم بثالث يوم من ملتقى خبزونات.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third day of our Bread and Net Forum, sixth forum. We have a few sessions until 7 p.m. We're going to address how governmental institutions are dealing with data and personal data, especially in conflicts in zones of conflicts and wars such as Yemen, Lebanon, Palestine. We're going to talk about the influence of politics on the digital sphere in the MENA region. We're also going to talk about the SMEX 2023 reports. We're going to talk with our colleagues from SMEX. We're also going to talk about mobile phones and the impact of mobile phones in general. Today we have a number of guests with us. We have Fahmi al-Baheth from Yemen, who is an expert in digital rights and digital peace. We have Khattab Hamad, who is also an expert in digital rights from Sudan. As we all know, or as we're going to learn even in this session, the situation in countries such as Yemen and Sudan is quite critical because there are a lot of violations of rights, including digital rights. So these rights are in the field and in the internet sphere. There is a violation for privacy, for the protection of data. There is also a conflict between the two governments. In Yemen and Sudan, we have a lot of similarities. In Lebanon, what's happening in the south and even outside of the south, there was a lot of negligence in the protection of data, and we saw a lot of negligence at the level of the government. So this is one of the key issues that we have followed up within SMEX and that we were seeing in the broader sphere of news and events in the country. We're going to start with our colleagues Fahmi and Khattab. But first and foremost, we're going to give you some logistical guidelines. Since we are on Zoom, you can listen to this session in English or in Arabic. You can choose your preferred language at the bottom of the screen by clicking on the interpretation button. You can choose Arabic or English. You can also choose to watch the sign language interpretation. You can choose to pin the screen of the sign language interpreters in order to hear or to read their interpretation. We all know that in terms of data privacy, prior to the COVID pandemic, but even after, we can see that there were some gaps, that the way these data were handled was not excellent. And with the rise of conflicts in the area, the handling of personal data has been declining. We also see that some governments have actively violated the privacy of people, have not respected the privacy of people for reasons that could or could not be political. Let's start with Lebanon. We were able to identify multiple violations, whether at the level of the airport, in the Beirut International Airport. There were also violations at the level of communications companies when it comes to the registration of cars in Lebanon. We have also the cybersecurity unit that is still not active, despite it being the object of a decision that was made years ago by the government. I think that we have a lack of will to protect data, or a lack of understanding of how important such a protection could be. We have endured multiple crises, health crisis, public crisis, and now we are facing a war in the south of Lebanon. I think we can start with Fahmi. Generally speaking, in Yemen, what is the situation like? How are people handling their affairs? We have two governments that are opposing each other. The situation is very difficult at the level of the citizens in the field, but also in the digital sphere. Fahmi, it seems your microphone is closed. Thank you, Abed. Thank you, SMEX, for organizing Bread and Net. In truth, when we talk about Yemen, we're talking about some of the worst scenarios happening on a daily basis. And I think that first and foremost, you need to know that the Yemeni people are living in a state of war since 2014, and therefore the situation has been unstable, not only since 2014, but also since 2011, when the Arab Spring started. In 2014, the country became divided into two governments. We have two presidents, ministers, two cabinets, two ministers for communication in Sana'a, another one in Aden, and that applies to all of the ministries. Each government is trying to manage things according to its own methodologies, policies, politics. Amidst of all of this, the true victim is the average citizens, the average person. There are displacements between these two regions. The displacement is not necessarily due to the war or due to the fact that some people are at the level of the front lines. There is a displacement because of the violations of human rights. The people are forced to move from Houthi-controlled area to the internationally recognized government-controlled areas. So we're talking about the legitimate government here. There are other issues within the private sector that could affect the citizens. The private sector is not divided the same way that the government is. The private companies are still working either in both areas or under the control of both governments. They have the responsibility of protection of Yemeni data. The Yemeni citizen is not going to think first and foremost about the protection of their data. They might be able to trade the information they have, even the personal private data that they have, in exchange of food. So it's a very critical situation. Let's move to Khattab. Could you give us a general introduction about the situation in Sudan, the same way that Fahmi has given us an introduction to Yemen? We know that there is a war in Sudan, but can you perhaps give us a little bit more information about the global situation in Sudan? Thank you, Abad. Thank you, Fahmi. Thank you, SMEX, for organizing Bread and Net Forum. Thank you for having me as a panelist. In truth, talking about Sudan could take some time. In the context of this session, I need to shed the light on the local context of Sudan. Since April of the last year, there is a war between the two biggest armed groups in the country. There are other armed groups, but we have two groups that are fighting for control over Sudan. The fight for Khartoum started since day one. These groups are expanding their work to the second biggest governorate in Sudan, Al Jazeera. There is the city of cities in this area, which was the former capital of Khartoum, of Sudan. We're talking about very productive areas that have a lot of relationships with the neighboring countries. Since the first day of the war, the communication tower was occupied. And at the level of this tower, all technical operations of the state are handled. This tower has the National Center of Information, the Ministry of Communication, and last December, these forces also controlled the headquarters of Sodatel, which is one of the biggest data centers in North and East Africa. The problem is that there are a lot of human rights violations. There is also a full genocide of some countries and towns in a number of governorates within Sudan. There are also violations that were made not by the rapid support units. There are violations that are close to death sometimes. I think that some people were also assassinated. The member of the National Party was assassinated last week after days of torture. He was arrested and then tortured and then killed. When we talk about incidents affecting human rights, digital rights, protection of privacy will be handled later. Thank you, Khattab. Let's move back to Fahmi. We noticed that you said that there has been a division at the level of political decisions, but at the level of the private sector, private companies were still working under the both governments. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about discussion on identity. I think that we heard about two governments, different identities. There was a big discussion on this in Yemen. There was an issue with who was producing the ID cards, other official documents that would be or not recognized in one area or in another. Could you please clarify the situation on this, Fahmi? Yes, I think that we need to go back to the legal basis of this. There are no laws in Yemen that enact any data protection, personal data protection, personal data management handling, whether in government-controlled areas or in the Houthi area. In 2012, we had a law on the right to access information, and there were only a handful of laws that were related to the protection of privacy, Article 4. Another Article 51 states that no entity or stakeholder shall use the data of the citizen, which would be in contradiction with laws in place and in practice. However, there are no law in practice, no laws in place that could enhance the protection of data. There was also a difficulty in stopping the production of personal ID cards. We call them personal cards in Yemen. And so they used to be issued in Sana'a, which is now an area under the control of the Houthis, but also in other areas, there has been some negligence in the production of the official ID cards, and the production of these cards was rather negligent. There was no collection of data and data protection. So every side was able to access the other side's data. There was also an issue with the passport production. Countries are not accepting passports issued by or from Houthi-controlled areas, only from eastern areas. So the Eastern government has a monopoly on the production of passports. Furthermore, the situation or the discussion reached the personal ID, the legitimate or Eastern government wanted to stop the Houthis' capacity to produce ID cards, and for that reason, they decided to have an e-card that includes biometric data such as the picture, the fingerprint. Of course, the articles, the legal articles that I mentioned before, and the conflict between them and the actual access to biometric data. The biometric data does not exist in the Yemeni law anyway. But the Ministry of Interior decided to encourage international organizations such as the UN, and based on the experience of other countries, they have decided to launch this initiative. But we need to remember that in other countries, there are laws that govern the collection and the protection of biometric data. Now that we don't have a law that governs the collection of data, of personal data, their protection, their handling. And so these data were collected and they were stored in other countries, which is a leak of personal data of the Yemeni citizens to another country. Moreover, some employees in some ministries, some members of the army will be forced to use these e-biometric ID cards to encourage the citizens. The citizens will have to get the biometric card because they will not be able to access a passport without the biometric card, and therefore there will be no exit for them. They will not be able but to share this biometric data, which will be later on handled by an unknown entity. We don't know who is the company that is managing this. Of course, the ministry knows who is the company handling the storing and the management of the data, but the citizen does not know anything about this. Even from the economic perspective, were we respecting the law when we allocated the contract to this company? Was there a public tender? Who is following up on the collection of data, on the protection of this data? So it's not only the government who is in charge of this now. There are third parties that are involved in this operation. And I think that this constitutes a fertile land for anyone who wants to collect big data, control it, to handle it. And even at the level of governmental institutions, there is a collection of data for specific reason. For example, if we're talking about a contributing communication company, an internet distributor, data collection center, the infrastructure is very weak. There are individuals who were present on Facebook who would say that they were able to hack into the data center of whichever institution, which includes a lot of personal data that is very personal, very private. I don't know if I can delve right now or maybe later on into, oh no, maybe later on because I want to hear from Khattab about the law in Sudan. Khattab, what is the legal framework in Sudan? I think there is a similar crisis in Sudan with regards to the passports. People outside of Sudan are applying for a passport. How are their data handled?
شكرا عبد. في الحقيقة نحن كمان عندنا نفس
Thank you, Abed. In truth, we are facing similar issues, I would say, in Sudan, as the ones faced in Yemen. We don't have a data protection law. We don't have a law that governs the encryption of data. Fahmi talked about the importance of protecting and storing data in a safe manner. I think that there is a text in one of the payment regulations. It's an internal regulation related to the Central Bank of Sudan. And this regulation is addressed to the providers of internet services. And this article, this regulation, tackles kind of the protection and storage of and storing of data. And I think that the government allows the sharing of such data with third parties, but without sharing the personal information, the very personal identification of the individuals. We don't have a law or another legal text, legal basics that governs the protection of data. With regards to ID cards or identification papers, I think that Sudan is facing its biggest displacement vague, whether internal or external. A lot of citizens are facing many issues. The current conflict in Sudan is within the capital. And according to the last numbers that we have from 2 years ago, there are 15 million citizens living in Sudan. It's very difficult for these people to live in a place where there are no services. Khartoum has 4 functioning hospitals. There are issues with communication, with electricity. Not to forget the security situation. People are leaving and fleeing the area, including myself. There are people that ran away without any ID cards, without any identification papers, with no passport that allows them to leave the country. Some countries in the region allowed the Sudanese citizens, especially women and children, to access or to cross the borders with either an expired passport or their own local ID cards. Of course, some other countries were not as flexible.
نسبة لوجوده في مناطق سيطرة الدعم السريع بالإضافة لأنها فقدت الوصول أو يعني ما قادرة تشغل المطبعة الخاصة بالجوازات والأوراق الثبوتية الأخرى.
The government was not able perhaps to activate the print houses where the cards would be printed, where the passport would be printed, where the government would access a part of the backup of the data, and they started reoperating the issuance of passports and ID cards. And so there is a big issue with the data, with ID cards that need to be addressed. When people apply for a passport and they come to receive their papers, there are issues sometimes. The official page of Sudan is very active on Facebook. It publishes a list of the passports that were printed. However, the issue here is that you could do some doxing, you could do some tracking of the people who were able to access passports. Someone could target someone else. And the current temporary capital of Sudan
الجوازات التي حصلت على تأشيرة سفر على مجموعة مفتوحة على فيسبوك يعني.
There is an open group where the names of the people who received passports are published on the page so that these people can go and get their passport. So you're saying that they can amend, for example, any issues via Facebook? What you're saying is that the people's data is published for everyone in a public space, which is an issue. The governmental data center, which is the National Forum for Information, was occupied by the
معظم الخدمات الحكومية القائمة على الإنترنت أصبح يعني شبه مستحيل إنه الناس تصل لها. فمثلا أيوة، فمثلا خدمات الحج كان الناس بتقدم عن طريق جوجل فورم يعني.
People would be applying for Hajj trips via a Google form, so we have a big issue. There is some data that is stored outside of Sudan and Jordan, for example, for the Central Bank of Sudan, but also in other countries for other institutions. Thank you, Khattab. So we're hearing examples that show the similarities with the situation in Yemen. So let me tell you a little bit about Lebanon. We had a financial and economic crisis in the country, which made the production of passports in a way that responds to the demand very difficult. And for that reason, the General Security in Lebanon organized the application process via a platform where I would have to book an appointment for a passport appointment. This was presented by one of the organization we in SMEX talked with the General Security. We asked them if they had any financial issue. We asked them about the protection of data since they obtained a grant from an organization. We had to know about the privacy policy, the terms of service, the storage of information and data. After a lot of collaboration and talking and discussions, they told us that the data was preserved in general security centers. Only the general security could access this data. So they were very responsive. This shows us once again that privacy is not respected by design in the basis and the infrastructure of projects. And this is something that we need to work for in the future. We are not giving up on the protection of the privacy of the data of people. Perhaps today the protection of this data is not critical, but tomorrow it could be important. In the south of Lebanon, a lot of data was available, a lot of data was leaked. There was no particular interest. We talked about the registration of immatriculation plates. I can search for any immatriculation card. I can know where the person lives, what their phone number is, their name, and there has been no follow-up on this. There has been no accountability, and this is still widespread in Lebanon. Let's move to Fahmi again. In Yemen, not only we're talking about biometric cards or ID cards, we're talking about the banks. You told us that some banks are imposing the adoption of biometric cards for users, which allows the banks to collect personal data, and therefore banks are kind of taking an initiative to act as a governmental institution and adopting biometric cards. What is the dangers of collecting biometric cards? We know that banks collect a lot of data on their users. So I will talk about one of the biggest banks, which is one of the biggest banks in the region, in Sudan. It has the most used application, but lately this bank, a number of users started to share complaints that the bank is collecting their picture and their fingerprints. However, there is no justification for such a practice. And for the collection of biometric data by banks, we don't know what these companies, these banks are doing with this data, where they are going to store it and what they are going to use it for. We don't know if the approach of the bank is safe enough. We don't know if the GDPR are respected. We don't know if there is a party that did a penetration testing or an evaluation assessment to these storage system. We don't know if the data is stored in a database that is encrypted or not, that can be easily hacked, or a database that has sufficient protection. So all of this is unclear. And despite all of this, the bank is still trying to collect the fingerprints of all its users and clients. Of course, this includes biometric data. Every individual is allowed to know how his biometric data is going to be used and for how long this biometric personal data is going to be stored. Of course, there is no institutional laws that govern such a practice. And of course, the banks could be thinking from a financial business perspective and not from the perspective of privacy, personal data in the light of a conflict zone under two governments. The privacy policy of the bank says that it responds to governmental requests. The bank does not specify which governmental institutions would be reaching out to them, whether it's the judicial or the intelligence units. So it just said, the bank, they just said that they respond to governmental calls. We don't know which governmental calls, from which governmental entity. Are we talking about Sana'a? Are we talking about Aden? Which governmental entity are we talking about? The bank users could be in the eyes of one government or the other, criminals, or they could be wanted by one or other of the governments, and therefore this could be a risk on these users. So personally, I'm against the collection of this personal biometric data by these private institutions, despite the fact that they already have a lot of personal data on their users. There is no justification to collect this biometric data, which is very dangerous. Why? Because biometric data allows us to identify one person out of 7 billion other individuals. And we're not even exaggerating. We're not only talking about a birthday and an email. We're talking about biometric data that cannot be changed. Once shared, that's it, they have it. And you cannot even delete this data. The bank did not state what happens to the data once the user decides to close their account within this bank and move to another one. So there's a lot of unclarity in this regard. Yemen is also considered a rather open space, you know, when there are no testing on the data. I think that Yemen, however, can provide a lot of big data. There is also a lack of awareness at the level of people with regards to the importance of the data.
فقط التزم الصمت لأن الناس بسبب قلة الوعي هم من يدافعون عن البنك ويقولون هذه هي طريقة آمنة للتحقق. يا عزيزي صحيح هناك سلبيات وهناك إيجابيات للبيانات.
Some people are still defending banks. There are positive and negative aspects to the collection of biometric data, but this biometric data should only be collected in a way that protects the individual, the institution, that would have to take processes and measures to protect the data in a way that respects privacy, encryption,
data
and laws.
encryption. Thank you, Fahmi. Just to clarify, people are not only the only problem. The lack of laws is also the problem, exacerbated by the lack of awareness among people. So in addition to the absence of laws, the individual citizen does not realize that their data is valuable and that there should be a law that protects this data. So they see basically, or as they were told, that providing their biometric data is actually something that would help protect their account and their money. So they were told, or they were convinced, that this is a safe way, and therefore you will see these citizens protecting these measures blindly and without any research. Some people actually brag about the fact that the fingerprint is used to do everything, or is used to access everything. And as it turns out, these countries actually are in the most, or perpetrate the most violations of human rights. So we see basically a streamlining of these practices, but even in these countries, there are laws that actually protect the data of people and impose certain measures on the private sector to actually protect this data. Unfortunately, we do not have a strategy pertaining to cybersecurity, particularly with the legitimate government. The Houthis in the north maybe started discussing these issues. They have drafts pertaining to cyber crimes, and we have opposed, of course, some of these articles. I'm just saying that I'm not siding with one government, but but I'm just showcasing that one of these governments has started thinking about these issues which affect the day-to-day life of citizens. Even if we do not want, even if we want to pass a law, actually, the country is not yet in the right position to publish such laws or to promulgate these laws because we currently have two governments. We currently have two parliaments. So which is the legitimate body that will promulgate this body? If a law is promulgated or a decree is issued in one of the two authorities, which of will both authorities apply it? Will this law, for example, apply to the remaining regions that fall under the other authority? We hope, of course, that Yemen will once again be what it once was. It will be united once again. So, but in the meantime, I actually encourage the institutions and governments to stop data collection given the current division. And basically, I believe this will put all the data and all information at risk. This, of course, will put the information and the data at risk of future attacks or future violations, not necessarily immediate ones. With respect to bank transfers and bank issues, usually in countries under conflict or in economic crises, we find extended or increased reliance on cash transfers. In Sudan, this has been exploited to collect data and actually exploit the mistakes in this data in order to collect even more data. We're going to talk about the law a little bit, the amendment of the National Security Law, which was amended last week, and how this is related to the current situation. Let's start with the bank and cash transfers, and then we move to the other topic. Thank you, Abed, and thank you, Fahmi, for this brief around Yemen. It is nice to acquire this information, but unfortunately, of course, the situation is dire, as you have mentioned. Since the second day of the war, so 16th of April 2023, EBS, the government entity which deals with electronic banking systems, has completely stopped working. And basically, this institution supervises bids between banks, and therefore, all banks rely on this institution in order to run their day-to-day operations. There are only two banks in Sudan that have a public or a private administration and actually can run their operations without relying on EBS. The majority of people do not have access as a result of their banking accounts, and the banks even themselves stopped having access to their clients' data. The only bank that managed to overcome the situation was the Bank of Khartoum because it has a highly secure app with lots of verification steps that you have to go through in case you want to change your password or make any changes to your account. So, as a result, since other people could not access their bank accounts, they had to use mediators to run their banking operations via this Al Khartoum Bank. And of course, all of this is in exchange of a certain fee. As a result of that, unfortunately, many people
البيروقراطيه حقيقه لازم يعني تفتح بلاغ في قسم شرطه بعد كده تروح النيابه والنيابه
many people's money was stolen, many people lost their money, and in order to actually retrieve that money, the process is very complicated. You'll have to go to the police. The general prosecution also was not operational for the longest time. Even the bank itself did not really cooperate, and therefore the refund process was very tedious and was very lengthy.
ظهرت مبادره من من أحد يعني خبراء التكنولوجيا
As a result,
وعمل منظمة
there was an initiative by one of the technology experts.
يعني
He established
وطنية
a
وشعارات
platform.
أنا بشوفها
He
شعارات
uses
ديمقراطية
national
على أساس إنه
slogans,
يخلي
communist
الناس
slogans, in my
يعني
opinion.
يتبرعوا ببياناتهم
And
عشان في النهاية
he actually
أنت المفروض
encourages people to
تمثل
donate their
ديتا
data
فرصة
to
يعني
help others.
تعطي بياناتك
So
الشخصية الخاصة بك زي
actually,
رقم
you have to
البطاقة
share
ورقم
your
تليفونك
personal data,
اللي
your
أنت
bank
موجود فيها
account,
باسمك
your phone number, the region,
البيانات دي على أساس إنه
where you live,
أنت
your
يعني
address. And if you share this
أي
data
مؤسسة
online,
مفروض
if
هو يدخل
someone
على
sends you
الأدمن
money by
نفسه
mistake, they can
ويديهم
go to the admin
بطاقم
of the
عسكر
platform
خدمة
and
على أساس إنه
actually
يعني
provide
ينقذ من
a
الشخص
service.
الثاني اللي هو حول بالخطأ
نعم.
فبقى
So the
في
platform
يعني
actually
داتابيس
provides your
كمية كبيرة
data
جدا
to
وتصور
the
انه
person
في الغالب
who
صار
transferred you the money
بيستخدم
by
في العمليات
mistake,
يعني
and
زي
therefore
M16
they can
دي الناس
access that
بتاخدها
information about you, like
رقم
your phone
اتصال
number,
او بتاخدها
like your address,
آم،
etc.
يعني معلومات
Uh,
معينة
as a result,
عشان طبعا
this
نقصد
platform has gathered information around
اوراق
16,000 clients
التقنية
of Al
تطورت
Khartoum
لدرجة
Bank.
انه
This
يعني
has
هي
prompted Al
تشير
Khartoum Bank to
مسؤول
actually close the
بعدم
accounts
الرئيس
of
للأندية
some
التجارية وأنه
clients in
هو
order
الشيء
not to
الوحيد اللي
share
المفروض
information with
يتعامل معاها
third-party individuals.
في كمان
And
مشاكل تانية إنه
basically, there
خلينا
were
نمسك
other
دلوقتي
issues
لبنان
at
وجنوب
hand
السودان
as well. Another
عندنا
technology expert
يعني
created another
تطور كبير
platform,
لأنظمة المقاصة
which is
اللي
basically
هي
considered
وذلك
an
لأنه في جانب
alternative to
تاني كمان
the
بيحاول
EBS
موضوع
systems
الانتخابات
or government
يعني
bidding
هو أقرب
systems,
لحماية
or
البيانات فالمشكلة بقت أنه
it is
زي من بنك
basically
لبنك
the problem started
يجي أسئلة تقنية تمثل حاجة
as a result
معينة
of
يعني
the lack
فإحنا
of
منصة
an option to
على أساس
transfer from
إنه
bank to
دي
bank.
تكون نوعا ما شبه آلية
And
في
as a
جزء
result,
النسبة
he
هاي
created a
المواطن
semi-automated platform
يعني بيرفع
where
أي أو بيوصل أموال
citizens
للمنصة والمنصة بعد كده
can
بتجيب الناس
send
التانيين
money to the
فاهم
platform, and then the platform can
من
actually
تقنية يعني
find, for example,
فدي
someone
منصة
who's
هي
requesting a
بتنقل
similar transfer,
البيانات الشخصية الخاصة بك
and it would
وتنقلها
submit this
صورة
transfer to them.
صورة لك صورة شخصية لك بالإضافة وأنت متصور مع مع الرقم الوطني تبعك أو مع
So
بطاقتك
basically, you have to have a
فبقى كان
picture
في
of
تساؤلات إنه
yourself along with
دون
your
المتابعة أو
passport.
الناس إذا مسجلة
There
هل
are
هو
certain
فعلا بنفس
question
الطريقة
marks
لأنه
as to
إحنا ما
whether this
متأكدين
platform is
وأصلا
officially
الطريقة اللي بتمشي
registered
بيها
or not.
زي أنت حابب
And
أوكي
they were
براحتك
clear,
لكن إذا ما حابب
basically,
ممكن
that they
تخليها
are not registered, because there were
طيب
no
البيانات
means for
المدخرة
legal
للولاء
registration as
الفردية
a result of
بتمثل
the
أوراق
war.
مطلقا ميلة يعني
And
صح؟
the participation in such
يعني ما
activities
في
was
إذن
basically
يعني ما في
at
توضيح إذا كانت
the user's
هي
discretion.
بيانات مشفرة هي يعني
So
مخزنة في أي مكان هل المكان ده في دولة يعني ممكن الواحد يضمن فيها يعني حماية البيانات وكده أو لا ما في هو بس
you
طيب
could
بس
not
دومين عادي
guarantee
بشكل
whether
عام
or not, for
طيب بس كيف
example,
توصل يعني أنا كيف
the
نوصل
data was
بياناتي للمنصة
protected,
أصلا أنا الشركة
was
ذات ذاتها يعني
encrypted.
براجعت أنا شركة الحوالي الرئيسية ما بتساعدني إنه ألاقي هذا الخطأ.
How would people do
لا
actually
أنت
something like
أصلا كيف
that?
توصل له يعني على
Couldn't they
أساس إنه
find a
أنت
way,
عامل منصة
a better way
أنت
to
أصلا حابب
actually
تشفر بيانات
retrieve the
أنت ما
money
حابب
they
تتواصل
transferred by
في بنك
mistake
يقول لك
without
المفروض إنه
submitting their data to
يجيب
an anonymous
رجاء من
platform?
النيابه العامه والنيابه العامه كانت في اول شهور الحرب يعني متوقفه تماما يعني ما الدوله انهارت تماما في اول شهور
Yes,
الحرب
but the process was very
ف
lengthy. They could
رجعوا
resort to
للبداية
legal
خاص يعني هناك
means,
خاص
but
أمس
back
عرفنا
then,
إنه
in the
هناك
beginning of the war, the state
الناس ما
institutions
بتلاقي حل
completely collapsed, and as a result, citizens
طيب
had
بدي أسأل
to
سؤال
resort to
طب بالنسبة
private
لتعديل القانون
solutions.
قانون الأمن الوطني هل
With
بيأثر على
respect
خصوصية
to the
البيانات؟
amendment of the current
هذا
national
الامر الوطني
security law, will
تم
this
تنفيذه عام
affect the
2010
protection of data? Yes,
يعني
this
قبل
law was
2010
passed in
يعني قبل الحركه
2010
الاسلاميه وهو
under the
يعني
Islamic
قانون سيء
movement's
جدا
rule, al-Bashir's
وقانون
rule. It is
يعني
a very
بيتيح يعني الكثير من
bad
السلطات
law.
اللي ممكن يتم
It
استخدامها
actually
ضد الدولة
allows
عشان تحمي
many of
الاشخاص
the
اللي يسووه
states,
حتى قيادة الجهاز الامني
or
نفسه
many of the officials,
السلطات
to
دي
actually
معظمها
misuse
اللي
or
هي
abuse their powers.
يعني متعلقة بالحقوق
Here, basically,
الرقمية
we're
ممكن نقول
talking about
اللي هي
powers pertaining to
تقع
digital
تحت
rights. For
المادة 25
example, they
واللي
can
هي
claim that
يعني
a post
السلطات
falls
بتقدر
under Article
تسويق
25,
الاحتفال
And this would allow, of course, for the arrest, the search, and the investigation with basically certain individuals. So they will be, as a result, allowed to confiscate any of your belongings. In 2020, the transitional government, which mainly worked towards a civilian rule in Sudan, they amended the law. So this government amended the law, and as a result, the police was given the right to conduct these these practices like searching and investigation, while basically the other bodies' prerogatives would be restricted to searching. But unfortunately, as a result of the last amendment, these prerogatives or these competences were given back to the Security Council or the national security body, given the absence of any parliamentarian body or any parliament in Sudan at the moment. We only have the Sovereignty Council and the Prime Minister, which have only an honorary and an effective presence, so to speak. So basically, these apps have the ability, my apologies. Basically, the police or the Security Council now has the ability to tap into all the phone calls and the texts of citizens because they now control telecom companies. They established new data centers after. So basically, they established new data centers, and until now, we don't know what these data centers or who these data centers report to, but in general, they report to the government, and therefore the security bodies may have access to telecom data. In Lebanon, after what happened and the financial crisis, we are also starting to see many money transfer accounts. In Lebanon, we have a law on electronic financial transactions. It offers partial coverage for data privacy. It is not the best law, especially that it was drafted in 2008 and promulgated in 2014. So we don't have a clear-cut protection of data. As I said, we have new platforms that can actually track your geolocation as well. They can track who you're sending money to. They can see the data on your phone as well, these apps. So this is another form of a challenge that could be slightly different maybe. But even in Lebanon, we have the need for a law for data protection with clear accountability mechanisms. For example, the 2014 law suggested establishing a committee for data protection, but 6 years on or 10 years on, this committee has not yet been established. But at least we have a law. We're not completely devoid, but it's still better than nothing. But of course, we need to strive for better. Fahmi, with respect to Yemen, let me go back to Yemen now. Unfortunately, we're not only seeing governments collecting data. There are international organizations also collecting this data. In Jordan, for example, there was a lot of collection of data pertaining to Syrian refugees. Even now in Yemen, we know that they are collecting biometric information about people. So how is this data collected? How is it stored? Who is it shared with? Tell us a little bit of details about this data collection by international organizations. As usual, in countries with heavy refugee influxes and conflicts, international organizations flock to provide humanitarian assistance to the affected. And usually, a lot of personal information is collected at the level of the family and the individuals. Also, beneficiaries in Yemen has exceeded more than 50% of the population, or maybe 50 million families. But the danger lies in the collection of biometric data as well, especially for the breadwinners of the families, along with the children and the other members. For example, the WFP, the World Food Program, is one of the most prominent international organizations. They have a scope software, and they basically, or program, that helps them collect the personal information through local NGOs. They basically claim that they use this information for identification and to double check the ID of the beneficiary. But unfortunately, I don't think that collecting biometric information is the way to go, especially that there are other international organizations that operate without collecting biometric information. Is this the only way to double check the identity of the head of the family or of the family members? I think
ذلك يعتبر مقبولا، وبالتالي لا مشكلة أنك تصرف أو
so.
تعطي لأسر أخرى، أو نسبة الخطأ مقبولة. أنت لا يمكن أنك
Basically,
تكذب
the
أو
margin of error
تزور
is
منظمات
okay
إنسانية.
whenever there is
أيضا هناك
inclusion and exclusion.
تشخيص
This
وهذه
data, we don't know
معرفة
where it is
بشكل أسلم.
collected. We don't know whether
الذي سيحدث
uh,
بالضبط أنت كمحتاج
the
للمساعدة
beneficiaries consented
من
to
أعضاء
giving
الأسرة
out their
يجب أن
information.
تحصل على
And of course,
مساعدات
if they
وبالتالي أنت
did
تلحم
provide this
بمخاطر.
information,
ولذلك هو
sometimes
سلاح ذو
they end
حدين،
up
وهو أنه
not
نحن
receiving
نجري
the assistance or
التحقيقات
the aid. This is a
في
form
صف
of
المساعدة.
pressure or
إذا كنت
coercion, so
كانت
to
في
speak.
بالغذاء
For
وأنت
example, they would refuse to
يمكنك
give you food
الاستفيدة
assistance if you refuse to provide your biometric
بسبب
information. So this is a form of coercion, so to
للأسف
speak,
أيضا
whereby
تواجه
those in need would
في
not have any
هناك
other choice but to provide
وللأسف
their
تواجه
biometric
صعوبات في
information in
المقترحات
exchange of
تحترم
food assistance.
الخصوصية
This happens, of
والمساحة.
course, in the absence of any legal mechanisms in the
ليس هو
countries in conflict, even
ويبقى
though
موجودا
international
أيضا
organizations are bound to
عندما تعطي
respect the
بيانات
privacy
بيومترية
of
بسبب
their
هذه البيانات
beneficiaries.
الذي سيحدث. قد تجد
If
نفسك
you
ترتكب جريمة
provide
وترتكب خطأ.
نعم.
قد
For
تجد نفسك
example, if you
يعني
provide
سواء
this
على
biometric information
الوجه
and it gets
أو
leaked, what will
العض
happen
البصري،
then?
نحن
You might
الآن
find
للأسف
yourself
التكنولوجيا مختلفة
that
تماما. نحن
accused
صرنا
of a crime you didn't
ذكاء
commit,
اصطناعي
especially
بإمكاننا
that now we are
التحليل
in the
من
age of
خلال تصوير
AI.
الوجوه
Many things can be
هناك ما
distorted,
يسمى بالبرزنتيشن
many
اتاك.
things can be
بإمكانك
faked.
يعني الوصول
And as
تحصل على
such,
بيانات
you will
تبعية
find
أو
yourself
استعمال إنسان
in trouble
بيانات
if
تصبح
this
هدف
biometric
ثاني إذا كنت
information, your
مشغول بأي
biometric
حكومة.
information is
وهذا
used
ليس بشرط يعني بقول
to
الحكومة قد تكون
basically
جماعات إرهابية أو دول أخرى قد تحصل على هذه
copy your
البيانات
identity.
البيومترية، وبالتالي
Also,
يصير
this
التهريب سهل
biometric information
أن
can
يتم
be
التعرف
acquired by
عليك
any
أو يتم
government or any terrorist
لأنه بدل ما
organization,
أعرف
for
بيانات
example, and as a
شخصية
result, you will be
مجرد أن
clearly
الاستفادة عن
identified
خصوصيتك
by
وبيانات
CCTV
كالرقم
systems
الوطني
just for
والبرمجية فوق هذه
walking in the
البيانات.
street, for example.
يكون هناك ديتكشن، بالتالي التعرف عليك
And
بسهولة
facial
بدون حاجة
recognition
للتدخل الكبير. هناك كمان
technologies
فرص
now can
البيانات
help
في
identify
البيومترية. أنا
you
كنت في
wherever
برلين
you are.
أتذكر الأسبوع
Also, I think I remember last week there was a Yemeni journalist which published that the telecom company has revoked his phone number, and this phone number actually was given to someone else and then later used to hack into his Facebook, his email, and leak his messages. He said that he was blackmailed with some private pictures for members of his family.
وين كانت هذه البيانات انتشرت؟ يعني وين كان هو أرسلها؟ أين أرسل هذه البيانات في بدء الأمر؟
Where did he send this
هو
data
مستخدم
initially?
طبيعي، هو مستخدم
He is a
لشركة
regular
اتصالات
user
لكل شخص.
of a telecom
طبعا
company.
الشركة لأنه
The
بيعرف
company,
القوانين والشركات هذه
in the
حكومية،
absence of laws,
هم بيعتبروا هذاك
the
يعتبر
telecom
طرف آخر
company,
حتى في الحكومة أو
especially if
الجهة
you are, for
المعنية.
example,
ويتوفر الشركة من هي الجهة الحقيقية التي قامت بالطلب، أم أن ذلك كان يعني
if, for
عدم
example,
موظفين عام بإعطاء هذه البيانات. يعني كان
your
تخيل
data
أنت
is
رقم
leaked,
تليفونك ذهب يتم يعمل تليفونك بشكل طبيعي،
for
فجأة
example,
هذا التليفون
his
يتم
phone
غسله ويدفعه لشخص آخر
number
نشرنا فيه على
was
سماكس نفس الموضوع.
revoked and reissued. We published an article on SMEX with respect to that. So his phone number was revoked, it was reissued for someone else, and this someone else used the phone number to access his email and to access his Facebook accounts and Meta accounts. So this is an issue of privacy, but it should be an issue of the public because I believe this person has sustained a lot of damages as a result of these practices. This person was able maybe to raise the voice. Other people maybe are not able to do so. In summary, Abed, in Yemen, we are facing a lot of challenges when it comes to data protection and data privacy, especially in the absence of the law. Even in the absence of the law, some entities some private sector entities must take into account these ethics. They must take into account privacy and data protection, especially given the age we are in today. Unfortunately, citizens are considered a flock or they are dealt with as sheep, unfortunately. And the government has not paid any attention to the subject. So there's great inaction in the sense
خارجية ربما سوف تقوم بتنفيذها بكل بساطة. الشركات والمؤسسات الخاصة
telecom companies and international and the private sector companies are maybe also storing this data in other countries that are known for human rights violations. There's a huge dilemma also amongst the journalists and human rights defenders. Unfortunately, many of them did not raise the voice with respect to these topics. Imagine I came across a Facebook post of someone who claims that he is a human rights defender, but he raised a lot of question marks. So there are a lot of examples, and unfortunately, it is disappointing, especially that we're talking about international organizations, government institutions, and private companies. All of it is happening with immunity. Before we wrap up with Khattab, and if you have any other questions and recommendations later, with respect to the WFP, if someone is monitoring this topic and checking what kind of data they're collecting, they have a system called Scoop. It's published online, but we don't know where this data is collected. Of course, they take the picture, the fingerprint, the name, the date of birth, contact information, phone number, etc. So they take also information about members of the family, their ages, etc. And this data is saved somewhere. We don't know where they are saved. We don't know if government entities are capable of accessing this data. And we have of course, several warring parties and several or two authorities, two different authorities. We don't know which of the authorities have access to these data or to this data. For example, has the owners of this data, has their consent been taken before this data is shared? There is no entity, no authority in Yemen following up on the matter. We don't have any strategy, any security body, no civil society organizations even paying attention to this topic. CSOs working in this topic are very limited. They can be counted, they are very minimal, and
عرفت انه تم استهداف او
I
التهديد
know that
بشخصيه
some organizations
مسؤول عن الحديث عن مواضيع معينه ولكن ندرك ان هناك مسؤوليات
have
كبيره
actually
تتعلق
been
عاده
threatened
بالاشخاص
also.
المدافعين عن حقوق الانسان منظمات الاتحاد
But
لحقوق
I think
الانسان
there is a
وغيرهم
lot
من
of
قبل تدافع او تعرف استهداف
responsibilities that are
المواطنين
incumbent on
المواطنين
these
المسؤولين عن خلال
organizations.
الفتره
Even human rights
القادمه
defenders,
سواء
they have to work
بحملات
during the
توعيه
upcoming
وغيرها من
period
الاحداث
on
التي
awareness
ستكون
raising
هدفا
campaigns
للمواطن
in order to
لإثارة
sensitize
المواضيع
people on the
ولكن هل
importance
القضايا
of
الرائعة
data
في أمر
protection
الحديث عن
and to
مسؤوليات
actually
هذه
shed the light
ولكن
on
تعتمد
these
عهود
issues
دولية
and
وتكون
these
عهود
cases,
دولية
and to
وإجراءات
actually
إنسانية
rely on
وتتناسب مع
international
شريعات
standards and
وقانونات
resort to
دولية ما هي
international
الأساليب
bodies.
التي يفرض
Maybe we can
يتم
also
الوصول إلى الصوت
communicate
العالي
with
إيجاد
the private sector
البزنس أكثر
companies
الخصوصية
and
التي
sensitize
يوجه
them
المزيد
with
من الأموال
respect
لنقل
to the
الراس المال
importance
وتدفق
of
هذه الأموال
privacy.
وطرح الفلوس في
Um,
الهواء وربما
Maybe they are not aware
يساهم
of the importance
بتضييع
of
فرص
privacy and data
الخروج
protection.
بأفضل
All of
الحلول
this
التي
maybe
تقدمها
can serve as the
شكرا
best
فهمي. يعني
solution possible
فرجيتنا كيف
under current
تعتمد أنه
circumstances.
حسب بدنا القوانين انفصال الدول
So in Yemen,
يمكن الوعي، فالاعتماد هلا هو على الرأي العام أكثر.
we rely
بدي
currently
أنتقل من
on the
خطاب
public opinion. I
لأستاذ
will move
خطاب
to
قبل ما
Khattab, the
يكون
last
عنده أي سؤال.
question,
خطاب،
before we see if anyone else
بالنسبة
has
للداتا
another
سنتر،
question.
كنت شوي عم تفضل في
Khattab,
الدعم السريع عن الداتا سنتر المتعلق
you
بالاتصالات.
talked
كيف ممكن
about
هو الأكبر أو أكبر داتا سنتر بأفريقيا؟ لأنه كلنا
the
بنعرف
biggest
إنه
data center in
الشركات السودانية
Africa.
اخترقت
We know
الجمهورية
that
من قبل
Sudanese telecom companies were
يعني
pioneers
الحصول
in
على
the
حدود
field. They had
شاملة
large
للجمهورية. يعني كيف
client
قدر إنه
bases.
يسيطر على
What does
داتا
this
سنتر
mean?
متعلق بالاتصالات للمواطنين العاديين؟ يعني عم نحكي.
اوكي طيب بصراحة عبد يعني هاي الدعم
Abed,
السريع هي مدعومة من قوى إقليمية يعني من دول
the
ثانية
قوات الدعم السريع or the
يعني
quick or the
بأي
swift
إدارة إذا
support
أوفوا
forces,
فعالياتها في سباق الداتا
they have
التعاوني.
participated in
هاي الدعم السريع
the
حاليا
race
مسيطر
for
على
big
يعني
data
جزء كبير
and
من التصدير
AI. They
الإفريقي.
are now in control
أفريقيا حاليا
over
الأكبر في
one
فصيلة
of the
الاتصالات
largest,
الحالية.
biggest,
فهاي
or
هو
one of the
الدعم
largest
السريع
data
بكل
centers
جزئياته
in
يعني
Africa.
يعني هو
It
بيحتوي
is,
على العديد من المؤسسات
it
السودانية
contains
منها شركات اتصالات
data
بعينها يعني
for
الرئيسة
many
تنس
international
منها
or many
إدارة
telecom
السجل المدني كمان حاليا
companies,
مسيطر على مركز
as
إدارة
well
السجل المدني
as public
الداخلي جوا
institutions.
جوا يعني إدارة السجل المدني بالإضافة للمركز القومي للمعلومات اللي هو
And
جزء
the
مهم
National
جدا خاص
Data
بالاختبارات
Center, which
ومصادر
contains,
بيانات
of
ذهبية
course,
بعينها يعني.
all the information on the and
الحاجة
data
دي
pertaining
ممكن
to
يتم
public
استغلالها عن طريق
institutions.
الدعم السريع
This, of
المدني
course, can be
لاستهداف
exploited by
شخصيات
the quick
بعينها ممكن
support
يعني
or the
يتم عن
swift support
طريقه
forces in order to
يعني
target
تهديد
individuals
واستهداف أشخاص
or
معينين
intimidate
المعارضين للدعم
some
السريع
individuals,
والمواطنين عموما
citizens in
والسياسيين
general,
وغيرهم.
politicians as well,
استهداف
and
البيانات ممكن
other
يعني
people.
الدعم السريع حاليا هو عبارة عن ميليشيا يعني مرتزقة هي هدفها حاليا النهب والسلب يعني ما عندها أي هدف سياسي معلن. ف هم ممكن كمان يكونوا
So
كمية مهولة من الداتا. السودان فيه 48
Sudan
مليون، ممكن
contains
نقدر نتم بيعها في
or
السوق
has
السوداء يعني.
48 million citizens,
لكن
and therefore all this data can be sold in the black market
الاستخدام السريع لاستخدامها في شتى المجالات يعني.
to be used
للأسف
in
ما
different
عندها أي غطاء أخلاقي، ما عندها أي غطاء
means.
قانوني.
So they don't have any ethical framework, any
لاستخدام
legal
البيانات
framework
وللأسف
that will prevent them from exploiting
هي يعني
this data.
هي شبه عسكرية
Unfortunately, in
مصممة
general, these are
لحفظ هذه البيانات. فهي
paramilitary
المواضيع يعني حساسة،
forces, and discussing with
وأصلا
them
السودان
with
ملتهب
respect
يعني حاليا مدتها أكثر
to
من سنة،
to these
والسودان الآن
issues is
في
not
في
easy.
تقدم واضح ممكن يؤدي
Currently, there is
لنتيجة
no
سيئة.
clear progress as
جيد
to
الاستخدام السريع
how these
ممكن
forces will stop.
الاستخدام السريع ممكن يؤثر فيها
So,
تناقص خصوصية البيانات وحماية البيانات.
يعني طيب برأيك يعني فهمي اقترح انه
in your
نبني
opinion,
آرائنا
Fahmi
على الوعي
suggested that we
المجتمعي
build on
ونطبق
community awareness because laws are not
نسعى
being
لأن
implemented. There
نساعد
is a
الآخرين. بس
current,
برأيك هناك بعض
there is a
الحلول
strong
المتاحة
division.
غير مناسبة.
What are
يعني
the
خلينا نحكي
options
عن
that
بس
are available as
بس
well?
طيب هو بصراحة يعني الوضع في السودان حاليا ممكن نقول ما زي اليمن، لأنه الناس لسه ما تطبعت مع الحرب بشكل كامل. والوضع حاليا
So
يعني
it is
يعني
clear
حتى الناس اللي
currently
شغالة في
that
يعني في الخدمات الإنسانية في توفير الغذاء والمأوى وكده بيتم استهدافهم. فأي حديث عن
so any
يعني
talk
عن مواضيع يعني
about
ممكن الناس ياخدوها، هم بيعتبروها طبعا مواضيع ثانوية. بيقولوا لك الناس في شنو وانت في شنو يعني. صعب جدا انك تلقى دعم شعبي في وضع
so it's
زي
really
السودان.
difficult for you to get
فاعتقد انه يعني السودان
public
لابد
support
من
in this case.
المجتمع المدني، وبالاضافه للممولين. يعني ممكن يتم ربط هذه
So
الاشياء
in addition to that,
الاهداف اللي احنا رامين لها مع ممولين الاغاثات مع غيره، على اساس انه يتم ضغط السلطات نفسها. لانه يعني الرهان، انا بتكلم عن سياق السودان يعني، لانه ما اعرف، ما خبير في اليمن
so I'm
بشكل
talking
كامل.
about the Sudanese
صعب جدا
context. I'm
انه
not an expert
يعني
in the
المجتمع
Yemeni
الشعبي يغير
context,
هذه
but it's
الضغط
difficult.
الشعبي تجاه هذه القضايا. ما اعتقد انه ممكن يجيب نتيجة في وقت يعني نتيجة آنية. ممكن يكون بعد سنتين ثلاثة، لكن إذا أردنا يعني نتيجة
So
آنية
I don't
والوضع
think
فعلا حارج جدا،
if you
فأكيد
want
أنا ضد
a quick solution,
زي ما قلت
I
انه
think
يعني
that
يتم
we can
يعني مالتي ستيك هولدر ديسكشن،
hold
ويسمع من
multi-stakeholder
المؤسسات الدوليه
discussions
والاقليميه
and
عشان
lobby
نساعد
with
في تصفيه السودان
regional
من
and international organizations. Otherwise, I don't see any solution.
شكرا خطاب. طيب نتشكركم جزيلا على
Thank you, Khattab. I thank
ونتمنى
you
بصراحة
very
إنه
much
هي
for
نحاول
this
نجمع
session.
أسئلة قبل ما نختم
I don't know, Khattab and Fahmi, if you have any last words
نستقبل
before we wrap up,
فهمي وبهت
because I think
توصيات أول ما نختم.
we're running short
شكرا
on
شكرا
time.
جزيلا
Thank you so
في حاجة
much.
إضافة لهذه الخبرات
We
اللي
need
دارت
to
في بلدنا
exchange
سواء في
experiences
السودان إحنا كذا
in the remaining
ونستفادة
countries
من التجارب
and
الأخرى
to
في
actually benefit
القضايا
from
الإنسانية
the
وكيف
experiences
الدولة
of
ممكن
other
يساهم في
companies
الوصول ربما
and
إلى
other
حلول
countries. And I
باسم
think
ثانية
this will
تسوية
help
حلول في دول أخرى
get
ذكر
to better
خطاب
solutions.
وأشار إلى ذلك. هذه فقط
As Khattab
الإضافة
mentioned,
الموجودة عندي. شكرا
this
لكل
is what I wanted to add. Thank you
شكرا
so
فهمي.
much.
خطاب في شيء حابب تضيفه بعد؟
والله انا حابب اقول انه يعني
I just want to
يعني
say
الناس تعمل، الناس ما
that
بس يعني تكون يعني بس تنتقد وخلاص. المفروض يكون
people
في
should
مساعدة
work and not
يعني
only
توجيه
criticize.
مع المؤسسات الداخلية
We
والخارجية،
should
وحتى الافراد المؤثرين
basically network
ممكن يلعبوا دور
with
كبير
international
في اي حرب
organizations
ممكن يقدم فيها
because
استراتيجية.
they can play a great role.
شكرا جزيلا
That's
خطاب،
it.
وشكرا
Thank you.
فهمي، وعلى أمل
Thank you,
أنه نشوفكم
Khattab, and thank you,
في
Fahmi.
لقاءات مقبلة
We hope that we
بإذن
meet in
في
future events,
القادم
and
قريبا
we hope
ببيروت.
in the
شكرا جزيلا
next
للحضور
Bread and Net we
والاستماع
will
أيها
meet live
الجالسين
in
في
Beirut. I remind you
المقهى
that this
أكيد
session
واللي نعود
you
نستضيف
will
في
follow it on
القادم.
YouTube later on. Thank you.